What would you do if someone laughed at you thinking you could never pull off the impossible, and then you did? Welcome back to Twilight Tales. If you're visiting us for the very first time, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more heart-pounding, jaw-dropping stories that remind us how unpredictable life can be. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated, only to shock everyone with what you could really do? Today's story is one of those rare moments where pride meets skill, and the truth? It flips everything upside down. Our tale begins with a woman who thought she'd seen it all. A CEO with a reputation for being fearless, smart, and maybe a little too confident. She ran her company like a queen on her throne, nothing escaped her sharp eyes and no one could bluff their way past her. And then came him. Not a man in a suit. Not a polished executive. Just a quiet, humble guy in an oil-stained shirt, standing in the corner of a luxury car showroom she happened to be visiting. He didn't look like anyone who could impress her. He wasn't there to sell her anything and he certainly wasn't there to flatter her. But fate had a different plan. When her friend's imported sports car broke down right there in the parking lot, a machine worth more than some people's homes, she smirked, half joking, half daring, and said to the man, "Fix this, and I'll marry you." Everyone around laughed. Someone even muttered, "Good luck, buddy, this thing needs a miracle." They didn't know she wasn't serious. She was just testing him, curious to see if he'd even try. But what she didn't realize was that she had just challenged the wrong man. This is the story of how a single dare turned into something neither of them could have predicted. It was one of those sunny afternoons where everything felt too perfect to go wrong, until it did. The CEO, whose name was Vanessa, had just finished a meeting with a luxury car dealership to discuss a potential sponsorship for her company's charity event. She was sharp, confident, wearing a tailored white suit and heels that clicked on the showroom floor like a metronome of authority. Her friend Melissa had parked her prized sports car out front, a sleek, midnight blue masterpiece from Italy. As Vanessa and Melissa stepped out, ready to leave, Melissa pressed the start button. Nothing. A cough, a sputter, then silence. Melissa frowned, tried again. Same thing. People in the showroom peeked outside, curious. One of the salesmen hurried over, but after glancing under the hood, he shook his head. "Ma'am, you'll need to tow it. The engines? Well, let's just say it's complicated." Vanessa crossed her arms. Complicated doesn't mean impossible. That's when she noticed him. He was leaning against the side of the building, wearing dark jeans, a faded t-shirt, and work boots. His hands were stained with grease, and there was a small wrench tucked into his back pocket. She tilted her head. You work here?" He shook his head. "Nope. Just fixing something for a friend." Something about his calmness made her smirk. "Think you could fix this?" she asked, pointing at the sleek car. He glanced at it, expression unreadable. "Maybe." The way he said it, no bragging, no hesitation, caught her attention. And that's when, with a mischievous grin, Vanessa said the words that would change everything. "Fix this, and I'll marry you." Melissa gasped. A couple of onlookers chuckled. Someone from the showroom called out, "Better start shopping for a ring." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to laugh it off. Instead, he just walked over to the car and popped the hood. A small crowd was already forming, drawn in by the sight of the sleek Italian beauty with its hood lifted. The polished chrome and flawless paint looked almost too perfect to belong to a car that wouldn't start, but under the hood, it was another story. The man, his name, as Vanessa would soon learn, was Daniel, stood quietly, surveying the engine like a surgeon about to make his first incision. His eyes didn't dart around nervously. Instead, they studied every line, every cable, every component with deliberate focus. Vanessa, meanwhile, leaned against the fender with her arms folded, lips curled in that half-smile she wore when she was certain she was in control. "Good luck with that," one of the showroom mechanics muttered under his breath. "This isn't your average sedan. That's a V12, hand-built. You can't just wing it." Another voice chimed in from the crowd. "I've worked on cars 20 years and even I wouldn't touch that without the manufacturer's tools." Vanessa's grin widened. She loved a good spectacle and right now Daniel was center stage. She figured he'd poke around for a few minutes, mumble something about it being beyond repair and walk away, just as she expected when she made the dare. Daniel, however, didn't even look up at the comments swirling around him. His hands moved slowly over the engine, feeling for heat, tapping certain components, checking the tension of belts, twisting his wrist to peer into narrow spaces where wires and tubes tangled together like veins. Melissa, growing impatient, called out, "Look, don't feel bad if you can't figure it out. This thing's been acting up for weeks. The dealership said they'd have to order parts from Italy." Vanessa chuckled softly. It's fine, Melissa. Let him try. Maybe I'll have to start wedding planning by the end of the day. The sarcasm in her tone made a few people laugh. Still, there was something almost unsettling about how Daniel moved. Like every piece of this engine was a puzzle he'd already solved 1,000 times before. A man in a crisp business suit whispered to another, "He's just wasting time. She's going to eat him alive when he fails." But as Daniel reached for a small wrench from his back pocket and began adjusting something deep within the engine bay, his calmness didn't waver. His eyes narrowed slightly as if blocking out the chatter around him. Vanessa tilted her head. "You don't talk much, do you?" He gave the smallest of smiles. "Talking doesn't fix engines." The words caught her off guard. Not arrogant, not defensive, just matter of fact. The laughter from the crowd quieted for a moment. And though Vanessa didn't want to admit it, a tiny seed of curiosity was beginning to sprout inside her. What if he actually could do it? Daniel didn't waste time. He set the small wrench on the edge of the fender, then reached deeper into the engine bay, his hands moving with a precision that made even the skeptical showroom mechanic stop smirking. First, he unplugged a narrow cable, inspecting the connector as if it could tell him a secret. He tapped it lightly, blew away a faint speck of debris, then reattached it with a soft click. Vanessa watched from her spot against the car, her eyebrow raised. "That's it? You just blow on it and it magically works." Daniel didn't even glance up. Not magic. Just paying attention. The crowd shuffled closer. A teenager in a baseball cap pulled out his phone, recording. The mechanic crossed his arms, leaning in to get a better look. Daniel reached for a screwdriver from the small leather tool roll he'd quietly pulled from his backpack. The tools weren't shiny or new. In fact, they looked worn, well-used, like they'd been through hundreds of jobs. But his grip on them was sure, confident. He loosened a panel, reached in, and adjusted a set of wires with the kind of delicate touch most people reserve for handling glass. Then he pulled back, studying the arrangement like an artist stepping away from a canvas. "You've worked on these before?" Melissa asked, curiosity replacing her earlier doubt. "Not this exact model," Daniel said, his voice even, "but engines talk if you know how to listen." Vanessa snorted quietly. "Engines talk. That's cute." Daniel finally looked up at her, not with annoyance but with the faintest hint of a grin. "It's not cute. It's true." He turned back, tightened something near the intake manifold, and then, almost as an afterthought, disconnected the battery. People exchanged glances. Why disconnect the power? But Daniel moved like a man with a plan, his pace steady and unhurried. Someone muttered in the back, if he was gonna quit, he'd have done it by now. Now the smell of warm oil and faint gasoline drifted in the air. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, slid underneath the car without asking for help, and began tapping on the chassis in different spots, listening for something. From above, Vanessa leaned down, peering into the shadows. "What on earth are you doing down there?" "Checking for the rattle you've been ignoring for months," Daniel replied casually, his voice echoing under the frame. Vanessa blinked. "How do you know there's a rattle?" "I can hear it when I stand next to the car," he said simply. It was the first time she didn't have a ready comeback. When he emerged again, his shirt now dusted with grime, his expression was unreadable. He tightened one last bolt, reconnected the battery and closed the hood halfway, but didn't slam it shut just yet. Instead, he walked around to the driver's side, slid into the leather seat and took a deep breath. His hand rested on the key. The crowd went silent. With one smooth turn, the engine roared to life, not coughing, not sputtering, but purring, smooth and strong as if it had never been broken at all. A few people gasped. Someone clapped. The mechanic in the crowd muttered, "Well, I'll be." Vanessa's smirk faltered for the first time all afternoon. She pushed off the fender, stepping closer to the driver's side. "That's impressive," she admitted, her voice softer than before. Daniel just shrugged, shutting off the engine. "I'm not done yet." Daniel stepped out of the driver's seat, the quiet confidence still there, but so was a faint crease between his brows. Vanessa caught it instantly. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he popped the hood again, reaching in and touching a few components. The engine's earlier purr had masked something, a faint, uneven rhythm that only someone with a trained ear would notice. Melissa leaned in. "It sounded fine to me." Daniel shook his head. "It's not fine. You've got a deeper problem. The fix I just did will hold, for now. But if I don't get to the root of it, this thing's going to quit on you again in a week." The mechanic from the crowd scoffed. "So you didn't fix it?" Daniel looked over his shoulder, unbothered. "I fixed the symptom. Now I'm going after the cause. Vanessa crossed her arms. And what's the cause? Daniel's eyes scanned the engine again. Could be a cracked head gasket. Could be a failing fuel pump. Or, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight. It could be something someone overlooked because it's not supposed to go wrong in a car this new. He leaned further in, flashlight beam gliding over the components until he froze. Found it. The crowd shifted, everyone craning their necks. What is it? Melissa asked. Daniel set the flashlight down and reached deep into the tangle of wires and metal, finally pulling out a small, frayed connector. Your fuel injector wiring's been chewed up. Vanessa frowned. Chewed up? By what? Daniel held it up. Probably a rodent. Happens more often than you think. They like warm engine bays. The mechanic stepped forward, shaking his head. That's not an easy fix on this model. The replacement part has to be custom ordered. Takes weeks. Daniel's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. Only if you order it. I can make one. A ripple of disbelief passed through the crowd. Vanessa tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. You can make it? Here. Now. Daniel nodded. I've got what I need in my truck. The mechanic laughed outright. Sorry, buddy, but you're not just gonna whip up a precision connector like this in a parking lot. Daniel didn't respond. He just walked away, heading toward the far end of the lot where an old pickup truck sat. Vanessa watched him go, part of her still convinced he'd come back empty-handed. But a tiny voice in her head whispered that maybe, just maybe, he'd surprise her again. Minutes later, Daniel returned with a small metal case. He knelt beside the car, opened it, and revealed an array of neatly organized tools and components, not store-bought parts but raw materials, wires and fittings. Where did you get all this? Melissa asked. Daniel's hands were already moving. Been carrying them for years. You never know when you'll need to make something from scratch. The crowd quieted, the skepticism giving way to fascination. Vanessa leaned forward, her earlier smirk gone. For the first time that day, she wasn't just watching for entertainment. She was watching to see if this man could actually pull off the impossible. Daniel's hands moved with a craftsman's rhythm, quick but never rushed. He stripped the frayed wiring clean, measured the damaged length, then carefully selected new copper wire from his case. The replacement was barely thicker than a strand of hair, yet he handled it like gold thread. The crowd huddled closer, almost holding their breath. Even the skeptical showroom mechanic had stopped scoffing and now crouched to get a better look. Vanessa found herself leaning in too, her eyes following every movement. She'd seen technicians work on cars before, but this was different. This wasn't trial and error. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Melissa whispered, I think he's actually going to do it. Daniel didn't answer. He was already soldering the new wire into place, sealing it with heat-shrink tubing he'd pulled from a small compartment in his case. The faint smell of melting plastic curled into the air. Vanessa tilted her head. How do you even know it'll work? Without looking up, he replied, because I've done it before, in worse conditions. What, like in a fancy garage? She teased. His mouth curved slightly. Try on the side of a desert road. At night. In the rain. There was something in his tone, not boastful but lived in, that made her pause. When the wiring was repaired, Daniel slid back into the driver's seat. He didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he adjusted a few dials on the dashboard, listening intently to the faint hum of the electronics. Finally, he turned the key. The engine roared to life again, this time, smoother than before. No sputter, no hesitation. Just pure, steady power. The mechanic muttered under his breath, That's perfect. Daniel revved the engine gently, listening for the smallest hint of trouble. There was none. He shut it off, stepped out, and wiped his hands on his rag. It's fixed, he said simply, like it was no big deal. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the crowd erupted in murmurs and low whistles. Someone clapped, then a few more joined in until the sound rippled through the small gathering. Vanessa stared at him, speechless for the first time that day. She had fully expected him to fail, maybe put on a good show but fail nonetheless. Yet here he was, having done exactly what she'd said was impossible. Melissa laughed, nudging her. So, should I start looking for bridesmaid dresses? The comment drew a few chuckles from the onlookers. Vanessa rolled her eyes, but she could feel her cheeks warming. She crossed her arms, trying to mask her surprise. Most people would have walked away. Especially with everyone watching. Daniel met her gaze, unshaken. I don't do things to prove people wrong. I do them because they can be done. Something in that answer landed harder than Vanessa expected. She realized in that moment that this man wasn't just skilled, he had a quiet strength, the kind that didn't need an audience to validate it. And it was unsettling. The crowd began to thin as the excitement faded, but Vanessa stayed put, arms still crossed, not out of defiance this time, but because she was trying to figure him out. Daniel packed his tools back into the small metal case with the same care he'd shown fixing the engine. Every piece had its place and he didn't rush a single movement. "You're not just some guy who tinkers with cars, are you?" she asked finally. He looked up, his gaze steady. "I told you, I listen to engines." "That's not an answer." He hesitated for a moment as if deciding how much to say. Then he closed the case, locked it, and leaned against the side of the car. "I used to build engines for a living. Not just fix them, build them from scratch. Custom jobs, high-performance machines. Some of them broke records." Melissa's eyes widened. "Like race cars?" He nodded. "And motorcycles, boats. Anything with an engine. I worked for a company overseas for a while. They paid me well, but I left when I realized I hated building for people who only cared about bragging rights." Vanessa studied him, her mind replaying the way he'd worked earlier, calm, deliberate, certain. "So what do you do now?" "I fix things for people who actually need them fixed. Farmers, delivery drivers, anyone who can't afford to wait weeks for a part or pay some ridiculous bill. I don't advertise. Word gets around." There was no arrogance in his tone, just fact. The showroom mechanic, still hanging around, let out a low whistle. "Man, I've been turning wrenches for 15 years, and I couldn't have done what you just did in under an hour." Daniel shrugged. "Experience teaches you two things, what to do and what not to waste time on." Vanessa caught herself smiling, not mockingly this time, but with a trace of genuine admiration. She hadn't expected that. In her world, people liked to flaunt their accomplishments, and here was this man standing in front of her with skills that could make him rich. Yet he was fixing engines in parking lots for strangers. It didn't make sense, and yet it did. "You could be working in the top performance shops in the world," she said. "I could," Daniel agreed, "but then I'd be doing it for the wrong reasons." The simplicity of his answer disarmed her. Melissa broke the silence with a grin. "Vanessa, I think you might have just lost a bet you didn't know you were in." Vanessa smirked faintly. "Maybe." But inside she was starting to wonder if her little joke, "Fix this and I'll marry you," was going to haunt her longer than she thought. Vanessa stood there for a moment, looking at Daniel in a way she hadn't looked at anyone in a long time, not as a CEO sizing someone up, but as a woman trying to understand the man in front of her. Melissa, of course, couldn't resist poking the bear. "So, Vanessa, you gonna keep your promise?" Vanessa shot her a glare. It wasn't a promise. It was sarcasm. Daniel just smirked, tucking the metal case under his arm. "Didn't sound like sarcasm when you said it." A few lingering onlookers chuckled. Vanessa felt her cheeks warm, which only annoyed her more. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Not as much as I enjoyed fixing that car," Daniel replied easily. "But maybe a close second." Melissa laughed out loud, stepping aside to give them space. Vanessa exhaled, the fight draining from her posture. "All right, fine. You impressed me. I'll admit it, I thought you were going to fail. Honestly, I wanted you to fail. Not because I have anything against you, but people don't usually prove me wrong." Daniel's eyes softened, though his voice stayed level. "Maybe that's because you don't give them the chance." The words landed harder than she expected. She blinked, thrown off by how simply he'd said it. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're used to being the smartest person in the room. Which is fine, you probably earned that. But it also means you don't expect anyone else to surprise you. So when they do, you don't know what to do with it." Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, but the truth in his tone stopped her. Melissa was grinning like she'd just won a jackpot. "Oh, he's good." Vanessa ignored her friend, instead stepping closer to Daniel. "So what do you expect me to do now? Say thank you and walk away?" Daniel shrugged. "That's up to you. I'm not here for a prize. I fixed the car because I could, and because I like seeing things work the way they're supposed to." There was something disarming about that. The idea that he wasn't chasing her approval, wasn't trying to win her over, wasn't angling for anything at all. She looked at him for a long moment. "You know, most men I meet would have taken that 'marry me' line and run with it. Bragged, posted about it, tried to get something out of it." Daniel's lips curved slightly. "I'm not most men." And there it was, the first time she genuinely smiled at him without a hint of sarcasm. Melissa clapped her hands together. "Well, if you're not gonna marry him, Vanessa, maybe I will." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. I think I've had enough proposals for one day. Vanessa let out a small laugh, real warm and unguarded. All right, Daniel. Maybe I was wrong about you. Or maybe, he said with a faint smirk, you just didn't know me yet. The noise of the crowd still echoed in the CEO's ears long after they left the event. People weren't just talking about the incredible repair, they were talking about the promise. Her promise. She sat in her office later that night, scrolling through her phone, watching clip after clip of strangers reacting to the moment she'd looked that mechanic in the eye and asked if he still wanted to marry her. Some laughed, some cried, but all of them agreed on one thing: the world needed more people who kept their word. She leaned back in her chair, thinking about everything that had led up to that day. She had gone in expecting to prove a point, to challenge someone she thought couldn't possibly meet her standard. But instead, she had been proven wrong in the most spectacular way. And she wasn't embarrassed about it, she was grateful. The mechanic, meanwhile, wasn't chasing the spotlight. In interviews, he stayed humble, always giving credit to his mentors, to hard work, and to never giving up when faced with a challenge. Skills don't come from luck, he told one reporter. They come from putting in the hours when no one's watching. For her, that struck deeper than any public reaction. In a world full of shortcuts and empty talk, here was a man who let his hands, and his work, speak for him. And maybe that was what drew her in more than anything else. As weeks passed, people began to notice something else. The CEO and the mechanic kept being spotted together, at coffee shops, at charity events, and sometimes just walking side by side down the street, talking and laughing like they had known each other for years. Neither confirmed anything to the press. They didn't need to. In the end, the story wasn't about a bet or a dare or even an engine. It was about respect. About how quickly assumptions can crumble when faced with undeniable truth. And about how, sometimes, the most unexpected encounters can change the course of your life. So, to everyone watching, remember this: never underestimate someone just because they don't fit the picture you have in your mind. You might miss out on brilliance. And you might miss out on something even rarer, a connection worth holding on to. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Twilight Tales for more stories that will surprise you, challenge you, and maybe even change the way you see the world. And tell me in the comments, if you were in her place, would you have kept your promise?